And so now I'm operating the Society for Earth Grid Healing, and that is really about creating nodes throughout the world, practitioners who can help to heal the earth. Often it's about finding that harmony with the earth again, about recognizing where are the power spots. I found that I'm not so good with the rods, but using body dowsing, I find actually was my way back in. And just allowing the body to be the instrument there. I find, of course, there's so many ways in. There's so many ways to access these energies.
Lux, thank you very much for coming along. It's an absolute pleasure to meet you, and I'm really looking forward to what we're going to talk about. You and I think, have got some similarities, and you left a comment on the YouTube channel which really drew my attention. Before we go into that, could you just tell the viewers something about yourself? Because I think you've had quite an extraordinary life so far.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's wonderful to be here. And yeah, I've been watching your YouTube videos for quite a while now. They're great stuff. The Hamish Miller material, and then also the videos you're putting out. You're doing a wonderful work there. So about myself, I actually kind of started off in the UK, as I was telling you a moment ago. When I was 12 years old, I went on a journey or a visit to the UK, and I went on a tour of all the sacred sites, Stonehenge, Avebury, and I just fell in love with it. We had a great tour guide. I think the tour was called Astral Travels. So as you can already tell, they're very, metaphysical and new age oriented already. Got out the dowsing rods when we were at these sites, and just, feeling those energies at that young age really had an impact on me. And so when I got back to Ontario, Canada, I just delved into all this stuff. I started hanging out at the local metaphysical stores, and I uh, started diving into things like Druidry and Celtic shamanism. When I was 13, I joined and trained with the Society of Celtic Shamanisms, which was a wonderful woman out from Alberta who was running that. Uh, Unfortunately, the Society of Celtic Shamans is no longer around, but offered a great training at the time. And I really just delved into kind of earth spirituality, earth-based spirituality at that time. And that actually led me, when I was 13, once again, I started a Yahoo group called, that really dates me, but a Yahoo group called the Earth Spirit, that was devoted to like all forms of earth spirituality. And that ran for a number of years. So I was really, really delved in. And that led me throughout my life to just continue to explore these mysteries. And in 2019, I started an organization called the Spirit World Center, where basically was offering training in shamanism and other forms of kind of mediumship and spirit work. And then that evolved until earlier this year. I moved it over to working with really the Earth Grid, going back to my passion project, really. And so now I'm operating the Society for Earth Grid Healing, and that is really about creating nodes throughout the world, practitioners who can help to heal the earth in spots where it's been, negatively affected by industrial civilization, but also to really heal people's relationship with the earth. Often it's about finding that harmony with the earth again, about recognizing where are the power spots. I find that you guys over in the UK probably don't have this problem as much as here, because I find all of your ley lines and all your energy lines, they tend to be mapped out. They tend to be intensively studied, at least to some degree. Whereas over in North America here, we have very little of that, maybe down in Sedona, yeah, there's a bit of that, but, up in Canada especially, there is nothing out there, and so really, my focus is on empowering people to get out there and to map it themselves, to find the power spots, to find places for ceremony, places where they can connect, and really kind of healing that relationship then, maybe not perhaps healing the land there, but healing their relationship with the land, finding their place again. And so that's been my main thing for the last, little while. Yeah.
Are you building that practice, that healing modality through the kind of shamanic route? Is that the way you use it? Or is it, have you evolved? I don't mean that in a derogatory way. Have you changed the way you work with that kind of spirituality?
It's curious, early on, when I was in the UK, when I was, at, Stonehenge and such, the and especially when I was younger, I guess, dowsing rods worked great for me, right? And then as I got older, I found when I returned to them, they didn't really work as well for me. And that was the case for a number of years up until, the last few years when I found that I'm not so good with the rods, but using body dowsing, I find actually was my way back in. And just allowing the body to be the instrument there. I find, of course, there's so many ways in. There's so many ways to access these energies, and something I found, um, especially I also run a podcast, which used to be called the Spirit World Center Podcast. Now it's called the Earth Healers, and what I found over so many interviews as well is everyone has a different spiritual nervous system. And so what works for some people, might not work for others. Some people might be really good with pendulum, others with rods. Myself, as I'm saying, my way back in was with body dowsing or using the body and picking up on those subtle hints. And so that kind of insight has been leading a lot of what I'm doing with the society nowadays, of just helping people find their own way in and then using that to really map out the land and understand it. I do offer a shamanic component, um, very much inspired by the core shamanism of Michael Harner and his Society for Shamanic or Foundation for Shamanic Studies, I believe. So working with that, more of as an advanced type of practice for connecting with earth spirits and nature spirits and incorporating that into the practice. But ultimately, the fundamental practice is really just about finding your sensitivity and then getting out there and working with the land in a way that it might be inspired by shamanic ideas, but is not itself shamanic.
Do you find that people are, well, might be a bit of a dumb question, really. Do you find that people that come to you are surprised by how quickly you are able to help them make their connections and develop that spiritual side of themselves?
I think so. I think so. I mean, a lot of the people that come to me, they have had some experience with, playing with a pendulum before, but you walk into a metaphysical store and it's, one of the first things you pick up, right? They're right there on the counter. But at the same time, using it for a uh, focused intention, like connecting with the grid or finding, checking your home and finding where the energy lines are running through. That yeah, I think that might be surprising to them where it's like, "Wow, this really worked quickly," almost too easy. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Part of the natural process, isn't it, for us all, really? Tell us more about about the way that you perceive the grid. You talk there um, specifically about the grid and your societies for the Earth grid healing. There are several grids that you refer to on your website, but you tend to perceive them really as a web around the Earth? Tell us about that. How does that kind of figure for you?
I find that in my own way of looking at it, there's many grid lines out there, right? There's many energy lines, and I look at it like blood flow through a body, and that, you have your arteries and your veins, and these are the big energy lines, right? Like, you think of the St. Michael's line in the UK, I would say that's like an artery line. And then you have the smaller capillaries that break off from that, right? And they bring that blood flow to every single point on your body, even if it's quite far away from your veins. I find that the same thing is going on with the earth. That's kind of how I conceptualize it. And if you tried to map every single line, your sheet of paper is gonna be covered in pen marks because there's just so much going on. So when I am going through, let's say, home healing or working with a property, it's I find it's not so much important in my practice to find every single energy line, but rather to find the problematic ones, right? What's the one that's going through, the power box on the side of your house, or which is the one that is causing issues while you sleep, and then assessing and amending anything like that. That's kind of, where I focus, not so much to map out every single, banker cube and Curry line and everything, but rather just to focus on what's actually causing problems here.
Would you regard the way that you work with the house healing energy, the house clearing, would you regard that as being as kind of coming under the broad heading of space clearing? Is that what you were sort of advertising as?
I feel so. Yeah, it's definitely working with the energies, but at the same time, I feel like a big part of what can be happening in a home can also be spiritual. It can be, are there entity attachments? Is there negative energy here from what has happened on the property in the past? And so that's when my shamanic background comes into it as well, where it's like, okay, this is how we can fix and amend the land, knowing that these things are going on, right? One thing I find as well is, a lot of hauntings, around here, they can be actually kind of spirits of the land that are kind of, a little upset at what you've been doing with the land, let's say. And so just kind of, bartering, making a peace treaty with, the local, spiritual, presences can be a big thing too. You don't have to force them out, you just have to come to an understanding. So that's where kind of the shamanic aspect comes into it as well.
Ab Absolutely. I think, so would you term that more as nature spirits? I think over here we call them elementals.
Yeah, I think they go by many names for sure in different, cultures. In my practice, I would call them nature spirits, but yeah, elementals for sure is a way to understand them. Basically, just consciousnesses that dwell within the landscape, and they can be very ancient, and they can also be very, upset. Let's say if you cut down an orchard of apples that have been there for of apple trees that have been in the backyard for ages, right? And you don't consult them, and then you cut them down, and then suddenly weird stuff starts happening in the home. I've seen that kind of thing many times.
Yeah, that's about it's yes, absolutely. Now, what about your own personal subtle energy, your guides that you work with? Do you call them guides? Or how does that how do you kind of, you know, feel your way into all of that stuff? Tell us about that.
I definitely conceptualize it as guides. Definitely, that's been a big part of the shamanic practice as well, finding, a guardian spirit or a very close entity that works with you and helps you out and helps you develop, and then working with many guides that are there for more of a specific purpose, right? Like, okay, this is the guide that comes through for healing, let's say. So, absolutely, I do find that, there's a lot of guide work in what I do, very, very important part of the practice, and, yeah, they're still around.
I should hope so. I should hope so.
Hey, you have a problem when they're not.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, they sort of change, don't they? As the human being develops and changes, the guides, the presence changes as well. Do you feel that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You know, some are there just for a certain period of your life or a certain challenge or a certain lesson, and then once you've got it, you know, it's like the training wheels come off, and it's like, okay, you're good for that. Now you're going to. Yeah, I find the referral network is quite something. You know, where you're referred to another guide to work on this. It's like, ah, you know, and that can be kind of sad sometimes when you know, you've worked with a guide for so long, and that's like, "Oh, okay, I'm taking my exit now, and you're gonna work with another presence." It's like, "Oh, okay, well, that's, you know, it's becoming quite attached to you."
Yeah, yeah. I know exactly what you mean. Okay. So when you left a comment on one of the videos, it was one of the Hamish Miller videos, I think. And I think, um, could you remember which one? Was it? Was it one of the? Was it the Spirit of the Serpent? The Earth Energy?
Believe so. Yeah, yeah, it was the Spirit and the Serpent. It was the one where, you and or where Hamish Miller and a crew as well as a lady, almost like a newscaster, was at a circle. Yeah. That was a very curious study that was done.
That was, yeah, that was the Spirit of the Serpent, and that was the first time that I worked with Hamish Miller in on video. That was way back in 2003, um, which for me was like a, uh I was at the point of I was at the point where my world was being turned upside down, and Hamish came in as a mentor, effectively. You know, the we were introduced through the universe, and I found his knowledge of Earth energy and sacred sites absolutely incredible. And of course, as a filmmaker that I was then, a program maker, I thought, well, the world must know about this. The world, I will make a program, and the broadcasters will love it. One of the first things that Hamish said was, I don't think any broadcasters are going to take this, Tim, but let's give it a go." And he was right, unfortunately. But now, of course, the world is a different place. So who knows? We may get some, broadcast television about subtle energy and sacred sites. I live in hope. But the thing is, what we finished that program with was Hamish dowsing. It was actually a petal pattern, so it was a little bit like the seed of life kind of pattern. But had also, of course, he had also doused what I refer to as the infinity symbol, which is a looping kind of shape. And I think the one that was illustrated at that point in the video was smaller little loop down here and a larger loop up there. That was what you commented on. So tell us about what you were seeing in that design, and we'll pull that apart a little bit because it's really really interesting. It's fascinating, in fact.
Yeah, it popped out at me as soon as I saw it, and, yeah, it's really curious. It was maybe, like, what, 4 feet, 5 feet, long and right at the center of the circle, and so what the analemma is, sorry, that symbol itself is called the analemma, and what it is that if you were to take a picture of the sky at the same time every day for a year, and so you're looking, you know, kind of semi-westward, taking a picture at around, 5 or let's say 5 o'clock every day. And you basically mark where the sun is on that picture throughout the year. The sun would actually be seen in kind of this stop motion time lapse to make a figure eight in the sky throughout the course of the year. And so this is, you know, during the summer when it's high in the sky, and then going to the winter when it's much lower. And so as it's high, in the summer, it is slowly tracing downwards, crossing the figure eight, and then continuing down until I believe until the winter solstice is how it works. And then after the winter solstice, it starts to rise again, and it traces the figure eight on the way back. And so this is an ancient symbol basically of the cycle of the seasons. It's tough to find actual historical references to the symbol. It's definitely known within astronomy and also astrology, especially Vedic astrology, where it's the analemma, and it's this figure eight, it's this infinity symbol vertically in the sky, and yeah, so there's a number of ways to interpret it, and because we don't have the ancient Greeks, let's say, talking about it within their astrology manuals, but it can be seen as this symbol of the cycle of the seasons, of the sun's path through the sky, and so I thought it was incredibly appropriate to find this symbol at a sacred site, such as the stone circle that you guys were working at. There's a number of other symbolic possibilities with it. Of course, it is a figure eight, and I believe the top half is a little smaller. The top loop is a little smaller than the bottom loop, so it could be seen as kind of an image of duality. It also can be understood as in so many of these ancient traditions, you go to Fraser's Golden Bough and this type of idea where the killing of the king ritual and such, and the sun being tied to really humanity's path through life. So you could also see the analemma as a symbol of the kind of descent of the soul. At the summer solstice, we're up here in the heavens, and then we travel down into the underworld of this existence. Kind of a Neoplatonic uh, idea, but yeah, it can be taken in many ways. But I think that the most core way to see it is as this cycle of the seasons, that it literally is kind of this encoded symbol of time, really, and of the cyclical time, right? Not the linear time that we have now, but rather this is the cyclical time of the ancients. That is this recurring motif that is the year, really.
Yeah, it's fascinating putting into that context of the solar system, um, because one of the things about it is obviously when we're dowsing, and you'll be aware of this, but when we're dowsing, and we've got let's just put it like this, it's a lot easier. So we've got I'll continue to call it the figure of eight. Well, we got this. Um, Obviously, as we douse and we plot it and show it up like we did on that video, it's a snapshot in time, rather like you were describing the ana, analemma
Hmm.
that we would see if we took a photo at 5 o'clock every day and put them together. You got snapshots illustrating as a time lapse. It would see that movement. Now the thing is, the key difference with the subtle energy sacred shape rather than the solar sacred shape, is that actually those two loops, they change. So that they literally are pulsing like this, like 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 the like the pump of the heart. It's a pulsing, and it's a regular rhythm. And so you've got those two. So they're doing this. And then you've got another two at right angles to those first two, and they're doing exactly the same in the rhythm, in this harmonious rhythm, which still to me indicates infinity, which is exactly what you said. So what we've got as a reality in the material world is everything built on number, isn't it? It's fundamentally mathematics that gives us shape in form. And really, what we're seeing in your interpretation and your relevance, and bringing in your knowledge of the analemma, is the similarity within the material world, whether it be in the subtle energies or whether it be in the physical, gigantic structure that is the sun crossing the heavens. Now, to me, that's just absolutely awesome. It's just, it's just mind blowing for a human being, as far as I'm concerned. Um, I've perhaps on a bit there. Is there anything that you want to sort of share as part of that?
It's absolutely amazing when these sacred geometry, these sacred symbols come up in multiple places. So have you found that symbol in, other circles, or it wasn't just a one-off with this one study?
No, it's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere because it's like the classic Homer Simpson donut, and you slice through a donut. What you get is the figure of eight. So the donut is the torus. And there's an academic, a guy called Jim Lyons. He was the academic in The Spirit of the Serpent, and he is absolutely convinced that the fundamental shapes of the universe are the torus and the sphere. And if you think about it, the sphere actually sits lovely and compact within the torus. So you've got the sphere going into the donut shape because it sits in the middle. So you've got this kind of basic building block that you can construct all sorts of things from subtle energies that will then materialize. Now, your question was, have we seen it anywhere else? And the answer is yes. It's in absolutely every vortex of subtle energy that we find within Earth energy. So it's to me what it's doing, or what seems to be implied, is that it is part of the process of information flow that is manifesting our physical reality. So to me, I relate it from us in the 21st century, the sciencey terms. I would say that what we're seeing is a representation of the quantum field manifesting form. That's the way I kind of read it.
That's fascinating. I hadn't really tied it back to the kind of the toroid shape, but that I can see that. Yeah, Jim Hoagland's done a lot of work on that. I think there's a physicist, Nazim Harriman, I believe, who I think has worked a lot with toroids and the torus shape. That's fascinating. So when you're finding it at sacred sites, does it tend to be kind of vertically situated or kind of horizontally? Like the one that Hamish found was kind of along the length of the circle, right?
Yeah, it's, as you know, dowsing. It's so much easier to douse a two-dimensional shape than it is to douse a three-dimensional thing. So we find them in that flat horizontal plane. So they're if that's the ground, then we find them there. But you've got, as I said, you've got one and you've got two, but there is another one that stands vertically. So, but I tend not to suggest to people that they try looking for that one because it's so darn difficult to find, because you've got to douse in this kind of vertical axis. But actually, having said that, what we're then talking about is actually you've got a vertical representation, which is exactly like the analemma that you would see, you know, in the galactic distance. The key about this, right, to me, because what we're talking about is this sacred shape that was later in history adopted as a symbol of infinity. And we both discussed the idea that actually it's related to time, it's related to the renewal, it's related to cycles, endless cycles, really. Now, the point is that we don't need, do we? We don't need to actually understand it on a logical level. Now, I said to you earlier on before we started recording that I'm very guilty of overthinking, and I was basically getting into an overthinking mode there. But the fundamental is that actually these sacred shapes have an effect on us anyway, even by us just witnessing their presence. Do you feel that that's something that you agree with?
Oh, absolutely. It's not like you have to be able to get out your protractor set and, do all the sacred shapes on graph paper and understand every bit of it. These things resonate with us, as symbols, right? That's really what a symbol is. We don't really have to understand everything about it in order to have it reference those subtle energies, that subtle reality. It comes back to, over the years, I've going back to actually what you were saying there, that, we're kind of it's difficult to fully understand these things. I've interviewed hundreds of mediums and spiritual practitioners and shamanic practitioners over the years. And something I've found, the way I've come to understand this is, everyone has a different way in. Everyone has a different way to work with these forces. And I think it's a very natural thing. They have different ways of conceptualizing what they're doing, and thereby they also have different experiences, right? Their guides, let's say, come in different ways. They even, interact in slightly different ways because they're empowered, let's say, to do this or that. And how I've come to understand this is that, in this material life that we're having, in this incarnation, we really are still limited by this primate brain that we have. And, you look at a chimpanzee, you wouldn't expect a chimpanzee to be able to understand nuclear physics. You wouldn't understand an ant to understand anything about human life, right? There are these cognitive gaps that prevent us from understanding certain things. And I I think there's in our modern society, there's a certain amount of hubris, I think, that comes from perhaps also the scientific establishment, where but I think it goes back to kind of an older Judeo-Christian understanding where it's like, okay, we are the sons of Noah, and we have been given this world to rule over. And and from that, and therefore also influencing early scientific efforts, was this idea that we are the pinnacle, and therefore that we can understand everything in reality, and that no mystery will stay a mystery to us once we find out that there's a mystery and we start working on it. And so kind of the scientific hubris is very much built into our civilization. And I think ultimately what's happening when we're working with spiritual forces is that we're working with this ineffable reality that we would not, it's incomprehensible to us. Like, just, you ask big questions like, where did the universe come from? How did something come from nothing? All these questions. And we sometimes we can't even conceptualize the question, much less find an answer. And so when we're working with these spiritual realities, I feel like we're working with this home base that, yes, we might have come from there, but because we're limited by this primate brain, we cannot actually look into or even comprehend what that reality is actually like. But and there's a big but there, even though the other side is incomprehensible to us and also inexpressible, really, we can't put it into human, small mouth movements, as Terence McKenna used to say. Even though it is incomprehensible, it it cares about us, and therefore it speaks to us through symbols that we can understand. That's the big thing. And I feel like, we were talking about guides earlier. I feel like one's guides or the spiritual presences that are coming into one's life, they they kind of look into you. They look into your spiritual vocabulary. They look into your mind and they say, okay, what symbols are there? What cultural allegories are there that we can work with to express things? And so I feel like this other side, it really cares about us. It wants to motivate us to action and motivate us to certain right action, right? To actually really, uh, as we progress upon our path, to help us develop. And so I feel it gives us these symbols, these signs through things like synchronicity, things like shamanic journeys and dreams. It speaks this symbolic vocabulary that we can understand. I f Personally, I feel that this is also, the heart of all the different religions as well, that all these different religions out there, they started with contact with the inexpressible, with the ineffable, and that different people, different groups, they had different symbol sets, and so they received very different revelations, let's say. But at the same time, they can all be connecting with that same ineffable, source. and just getting different ideas, different symbols, different ways of understanding that are appropriate to that culture, because the other side cares more that you act, that you or act in certain ways, that you are inspired to higher action, to love, these kind of things. It doesn't care. The other side doesn't care, in my experience, whether what it's telling you is, especially about metaphysics, is 100% correct. Close enough is good enough. And because it's basically coming from the standpoint of, "Look, you would not get it. If I showed you the other side, you wouldn't get it. You wouldn't comprehend it anyways. So what I'll give you is a map," right? Everyone gets a different map. A map that is close enough to inspire you on your path, to give you kind of a framework in which you can act to go on to, to do the things that your higher self wants you to do in this life, let's say. And so bringing this back to sacred geometry, I find that absolutely, there's these symbols that we have in our culture or in the collective unconsciousness that are there and are very powerful in our psychology and our souls, and that will come up again and again because it's a way of that great ineffable to communicate ideas to us and to inspire us to be the best that we can in this life. I think that's kind of what's going on there.
As wonderfully said, absolutely. And I love the fact that you used the word ineffable. It's a word that I came across fairly recently, and I love it. It's just such a superb word, but it is completely appropriate. It is ineffable, and I think the big sort of message, the subtext of what you're saying, which I love, is actually the way that you are talking about the earth and talking about the grid and talking about everything that we've discussed in subtle energies and spirit world. But what you're really saying is that, come on, we're a part of this. It is there. It's us, and how we respond and how we react to our lives influences what we are part of, because it is ineffable. And so, really, our choices are to live it in the way that we want to be held in it. That's the point, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. We are navigating this reality. We're sent in here. We have amnesia of who we really are, and but we are navigating this reality. Working with guides, working with spiritual forces, working with energies, and at the same time, we have so much self determination. We do have this free will, and I think that's part of the art of living. It's part of the game of, seeing how we're going to play it out. What are we going to create in this life? And so, yeah, I really don't feel that the spiritual realms are kind of like, "Yeah, hey, you're gonna do this in this life, and you're ordered to do this, and you're following orders." I feel like we'd have a very different experience if that was the case, if we were, like, army grunts being told what to do. Yeah, we have so much, capability and possibilities, before us, and so, absolutely, that individual expression is just such an important part of the game, really.
That's wonderful. Thank you very, very much for coming along, Lux. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet you.